All right, we have our whole board here. And it is 7:30. So I would call this meeting to order. It's the December 9th meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Plant Board at 7:31. We're meeting again today on Zoom per Governor Baker's executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law issued in March of this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. This meeting is being recorded. For those who are calling in, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Note that we will not be using the chat or the Q&A functions in this meeting. When it's your time to ask your questions, please turn your video on, as it will help us put the name to the face who's making comments. And if you've dialed in, these are all helpful hints from Dave. I appreciate this, Dave. If you've dialed in via phone and you'd like to raise your hand, you can do this by pressing the *9. And if you have dialed in, to unmute yourself, press *6 and then *6 again to mute. Okay, those are the administrative beginnings of our meeting. I want us to just take note of upcoming meeting dates. We have a special budget meeting on December 30th. I assume that we'll be receiving our materials shortly. Oops, let's see. Oh, I gotta do something. There we go. And our meeting date after December 30th, I don't want to go through the list right now, is January 13th. Any problems? Does anybody see something that reason that they would not be able to attend January 13th?
Nope.
I don't have my calendar open, but I'm pretty sure I'll be available.
Okay.
Yeah, so I posted them in the agenda for the year. They can be adjusted if needed, but it's the second Wednesday of the month.
Great.
So Alice?
Yeah.
I see that November 10th is on that. That's Veterans Day, I think.
11th, isn't it? Oh.
Is it? Well, it's
Yeah.
usually the Wednesday. Oh, is it always the 11th? Okay.
It's the 11th hour of the 11th
Yeah.
day of the 11th month.
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking it was this month, this year.
Thank you for
Okay.
noticing.
Yeah, just checking.
I can't think that far out.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be out of a pandemic by then and we'll meet in
Hopefully.
person.
Yeah.
Okay, let's begin the meeting with the director's update. Dave?
If you're on mute.
Yeah, let me just unmute. So we've been speaking with several battery manufacturers as well as full service battery energy solutions providers about the purchase and lease options for a battery, a utility scale size ranging from 2 to 5 megawatts for a duration of 2 to 4 hours. We have some ballpark estimates for both cost and value of the systems. Should the light plant determine that the battery energy solution provider is in the best interest, the staff will prepare and move forward with requests for proposals in 2021. Alternatively, we could hire a battery storage expert consultant to help us with an RFP and procurement process if deemed advisable. But we've been working on this primarily, Laura and I. So our plan is to continue to move forward in 2021 with this. We are in the testing phase with a third-party call center for off-hours call support. We tested the system. We tested it and integrated it with our outage management software. So we're moving along quite nicely with it. The next step is for staff to complete some more questionnaires. And then ultimately after the Christmas holiday, we'll train the staff and go live with it. So that's moving along nicely. We completed the annual inventory and the auditors will be out this Friday to complete their spot check. So that's moving along almost on a normal pace. We continue to work on the 2021 budget and we'll have that completed before the holiday. We will issue it to the board probably on the 23rd of December. Give you plenty of time to go through it before the December 30th budget meeting. The conduit installation on Barkis Farm, that's about 75% complete. So we're moving along. We're hoping to get all the conduit complete before a deep frost or freeze of the ground. And then we'll start building the new system. We now have about 3,600 Smart Hub customers. We're averaging about 100 customers per month. Last month, we had a little drop in the uptake, resulted in about 72 signups. We did issue a PO for the new telecom bucket truck, which was part of the 2020 budget. So that should be on hand this month, and we'll put it into service. That'll give us a full complement of vehicles in the telecom side. And the new truck will give us the ability to actually hook a trailer up to it and tow fiber out to the job site, which we're lacking right now. Carol's team ran the actual lien process earlier this week. The electric liens total about 81,000, which is approximately 75 customers. On the water and sewer side, it totaled about 41,000 over 74 customers. So grand total of 122,000. And just to put it into perspective, in 2019, at the same time, we had 35 electric counts, total of 37,000, in water sewer, 36 accounts, total of 28,000, or a grand total of 65,000. And so we're certainly seeing a little bit of increase there. And part of that is, we did suspend the collections process. But worth noting, this does vary from year to year. If I went back to 2018, we had a total of 28 accounts in electric for 30,000 and 110 accounts on water sewer for 81,000, or a total of 101. So we are seeing an uptake, but it does vary from year to year. And that's my update. Any questions?
Thank you. Ryan?
A quick question about those customers. Maybe Carol can answer this, but are they, are the stories changing? The reasons that they're not doing payment, is it more of COVID related, or is it more of your general issues, customer issues?
So I'll defer to Carol on that because she has the details, but the one thing I will say is we haven't done collections this year since the pandemic hit, and we feel that has a big impact on what you're seeing for numbers.
Okay, so it's our lack of being persistent to collect payment that you think the numbers are continuing to rise, rather than a real unusual need in the community. I think it's a great thing, and I know it's a hit to the way we're operating the light plant to not go after collections and collect what we're due. But I think this is the time to pause on that, and I'm happy to hear you're pausing. I'm concerned about customers that may have lost their job for no fault of their own and are struggling.
Yeah, I think the big concern, Brian, is when we get to April and we're allowed to collect, we have to come up with a strategic way to work with the customers to get them caught up, because some people are struggling. There's no question about it. And, the normal, April 15th pay or you're going to get shut off model is probably going to look a little different.
Yeah, that's good. It'll be a struggle then.
Yeah.
Dave, can you tell me, what do you need from the board on battery storage? Is the board to weigh in on whether we should purchase or lease battery storage or hire a consultant? What are the steps that you need from the board for guidance on battery storage?
So we'll bring that to the board in the next month or two. We're getting closer. We'll start having a topic to discuss that, and you guys will be able to weigh in. We'll show you the financials and what it looks like on our end. But Laura and I have been spending some time on it, probably not as much as we're getting there.
And Could I ask a clarifying question on storage? You had said it was 2 to 5 hours of stored energy, and it was 2 to 5 megawatts. Was it 2 to 5 megawatt output, or was it megawatt hour capacity?
It was 2 to 5 megawatts in 2 to 4 hours of duration.
Okay, so it's the megawatt hours vary based on the solution?
Yes.
Okay.
And as part of the, would a consultant help you decide the size and capacity needed for dispatchable energy? Or is that something you have a good handle on and we can move forward with one of these options for purchase or lease?
Yeah, we have a good handle on that. We do help with that portion.
So Dave,
Wendy.
our original strategy we thought we were going to get a 5 megawatt, and I know that's pretty costly. Are we concerned at all that the 2 to 4 hours is sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, we're really looking at, our peaks and the range of times. 4 hours would be optimal.
Yep.
It might not be economical. So
Yeah.
that's why we have the range of 2 to 4.
Okay.
The ideal, we would like to hit all 12 transmission peaks
Yep.
and the capacity peak annually. But there's also a reliability piece to this. And I've
Yep.
mentioned in the past that
Right.
with the solar saturation, we're very, very low at certain periods of the year, and we want to, be able to shift the solar output to help offset the peak fully, and the battery would help us with that.
Right. And that's fairly catastrophic. So this is a pretty high priority for us as a strategy. Correct?
Yes, correct.
So
Laura?
you're on mute.
Yep, just trying to figure out how to unmute. Just to add to a little bit more color to Wendy's question. I know it's hard to believe that I've been muted at any point in time ever, but yes, it does happen. To add a little bit more color to Wendy's question, that is, the 5 megawatt we were looking at when we were thinking strictly acquisition, because we need to plan not just for our solar saturation issues today, but as we're going to continue to add solar to the system,
Yep.
what we will need in the future. But as we're looking at more options and considering a lease, there are providers out there that offer like a 5-year lease. And in that instance, we might not need the full 5 megawatts over the next 5 years. If we were going to buy it, the life of the equipment is more than 5 years. You'd want to plan for more. But if you lease for a 5-year period, you might be able to get away with less. So that's another reason for the range in megawatt size that we're looking at.
And lease gives us some flexibility too, I suppose. So
And probably is that, I didn't mention that, we've talked about and are looking at is, let's say we put a 4 megawatt battery in. When we do the site work, we'd want to have it expandable, for another 4 megawatts or whatnot in the future. So there might be a little more upfront cost on the site work, but ideal would be to be able to expand the system when we needed to.
A quick question. Would a consultant help you with locating batteries within the distribution system, doing the analysis, or do your engineers have that covered?
We have that covered.
Any other questions regarding battery storage? Gordon? Mute? You're on mute, no, Gordon?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. One of the challenges is that when the technology landscape is changing really rapidly, sometimes there's an incentive to actually postpone jumping in, because that like in the next design cycle, it'll be twice as fast or whatever. So the lease sounds interesting that way too. You're not committing to a technology for a whole generation, 10 years or 20 years or whatever.
Yep, and that's why we're going to bring both options in front of the board when we're fully prepared. We're getting there, so hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be able to have a more detailed discussion on it.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Dave? Seeing none. We can move on to the next agenda item. This is a discussion that started at the last meeting, and this is an option that Concord has to purchase a contract under 2 different scenarios for nuclear power as a non-emitting source to our fuel supply, our power supply. And I think, who's presenting on this, Dave or Laura?
Laura's going to probably tag team on it. I'll let
Okay,
start.
great. Laura, it's up to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
you all should have, thank you. You all should have received some material about this opportunity.
Yep.
And maybe Dave, you could bring that up on the board, on the shared screen. So this new supply opportunity, sorry, there should be a slide deck.
Potential non-carbon emitting power supply opportunity.
No, there should be a PowerPoint.
Yep.
Not a PowerPoint, it's a PDF, but it is 5 pages.
Give me a second.
Nobody has that.
That went out on Friday, Laura?
I'm gonna resend it to you, Dave, right now. Yeah. While we're reading, to bring that up, so I just want to mention this new supply opportunity is actually got a couple different pieces to it. They don't all have to be executed simultaneously. You can do, door number 1 or door number 2 or both. And the first door is just extending, that's good, right there, is extending an existing nuclear supply contract that we have by 6 years. The current contract ends in 2030, and we're talking about adding another 5 years onto that. We'll talk more about that. The second opportunity is entering into a new contract that will be for 10 years from 2025 to 2034. And there are 2 pieces to this. There's energy, which can be shaped. We'll talk about that.
Is anybody having trouble?
Hearing, are you saying, Pam, are you having trouble hearing?
Is anybody having?
With hearing the presentation?
I'm not.
I'm not. You're on mute.
Should I
So
stop?
am I the only one having trouble hearing?
I think so.
Okay, all right, just need to know that. Thank you.
So the new contract has both an energy component and an optional capacity component that we could enter into. Next slide, please. So the existing contract, this is a little busy, but because we're extending an existing contract, I wanted to give you a flavor for what the existing contract is. CMLP entered into the original contract in July of 2019. And it's a little bit complex, but the basic idea of the deal was to create a block of energy, a uniform amount of energy by filling in carbon-free nuclear energy around the output of a solar array. So a new solar array was going to be built, a 50 megawatt array in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. You all know that the solar shape looks something like these charts below. The chart on the left is a typical January day, and the chart on the right is a typical July day. You can see the solar is the yellow that produces, sort of uniformly around the noon hour. Obviously, you get more in the summer than the winter. But this is not a uniform block. And so what the blue would do is the blue would be additional energy that would be brought in to fill in the shape around the gold to make a consistent 50 megawatt block from hour ending 8 to hour ending 23. And you can see the fill, as we call it, the blue fill, the shape of that obviously changes because the shape of the solar is changing. So that original contract, the solar, was a 20-year contract from 2024 to 2043 that we executed. And so Concord has that solar power and the renewable energy certificates that go with it. And then we purchased 5 years of that nuclear fill. And at the time, they didn't want to enter into any more of the nuclear because they hadn't received their recommissioning license. But we were always expected at that time that there would be an extension when they did complete the relicensing. And so this now that we're bringing to you today is that extension. And it extends by an additional 6 years to 2035, the nuclear component of the 2019 fixed hourly shape deal that smooths and fills in the Chariot solar power that we have already entered into. The extension price is about 3% lower than the current 6-year term. That's primarily because commodity prices have fallen since that time. So that's the first deal. It's pretty simple. It's fairly easy to paper because it's just an extension of the existing contract. It would just be adding the 5 years at the lower price. Okay, the next slide, please. The option, the second opportunity, which as I said, can be entered into separately, alone or in addition, is a new non-emitting nuclear physical supply deal that would come with ZECs, zero emissions credits, that would come associated with the power production and be retired as such. It has a 10-year term starting in 2025. It's firm physical day-ahead energy. It would be delivered at the Mass Hub, which is sort of in the center of Massachusetts, a little west of where we are. It could be purchased what we call around the clock, which would be a same amount every hour of the day, or it can be shaped, which is more advantageous to us because it provides more energy when we need more of it and less of it when we don't need as much of it. And as I said, it would be linked with the corresponding volume of effects. We'll look at a chart of what this looks like in a minute. But the other option with this particular deal is to enter into a capacity contract at the same time. For the benefit of those light board members who might not be familiar with the difference between energy and capacity, the energy is the volumetric output of power that is required by CMLP to serve its load. Capacity is a different product that's also required by CMLP to serve load, but it's basically a commitment that we have to have access to enough generation to meet our peak load. We have to prove that we have access to this capacity. So if we entered into this deal, this would help us meet that requirement by the ISO New England to have enough capacity to meet our peak load. The particulars of this capacity contract is that it would be determined using what we call a non-fixed price structure, which means that it's not exactly, normally buy capacity for like $4 a kilowatt month, or $6 a kilowatt month, or some fixed amount. In this particular contract, there's a cost sharing both up and down. And I can explain that a little bit more in a minute. The asset being used to hedge this capacity offer is NextEra's Bellingham facility, which is located in the southeastern New England zone, which is very good for us because that's in the middle of the load center. So to the extent that prices tend to separate and become very high at the load center, our capacity would be sitting in the load center, and so its value would be going up as those separating prices were going up. So that's an advantage of that, of the deal. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a graphical representation, which Alice had asked for at our last meeting. And what it shows, and this again, this is not a chart of RECs. This is a chart showing the resource, our supply, forward commitment supply portfolio by resource type. So yellow is solar and includes the on-system solar, as well as PPA solar that Concord owns or has access to, has contractual commitments with. The green is wind, We do largely have the recs for all of that. The blue is hydro, the purple is landfill, and then the pink is the existing nuclear that CMLP has entered into. It's primarily a 10-year deal that ends in 2029. The percentages there are the expected percentage of total needs that we'll have for that year. The gray are market-based power contracts that the light plan has entered into. You can see those diminishing between 2019 and 2023 considerably. They're diminishing for a couple reasons. One is because we are entering into more renewable or non-emitting contracts as time goes by. And the second reason is, as we get further out in time, Concord typically has less commitments forward purchased. The future is uncertain, and therefore we leave more open to future opportunities the further out in time we go. So it's not to mean that we'll only buy 8% from market-based purchases in 2023. It might very well be more than that, but we just haven't entered into those at this time. So the pink slash line, those are the incremental deals that the incremental deal that we're talking about entering into today. And so it is about 9% of the portfolio that we would be adding between 2025 and 2029. That is the new either around the clock or shake deal that we'd be entering into. It jumps to 14% in 2030 because in 2030 we have both the around the clock or shake deal that is part of the 9%, and then we have that extension that we were talking about for 5 years, the 2030 to 2034 extension of the existing deal. Okay, so 9 plus 5 is 14. And then in 2034, the new 9% deal falls off, and you have just that tail end of the extension, which is 5%. So this is kind of what the additions would look like as an impact on the portfolio. And I do believe that is the last slide.
Great.
Sorry, I could have done a better job going through that. I apologize.
Actually, that was a very good presentation. I appreciate that. Do we
Laura,
have questions?
Well, just
When-
a comment, just on history. So I remember when the board reviewed this nuclear contract, and it was at a time when we were talking about what are all the possible renewable options that we have, and there were limited options. So part of the board's sentiment is you have to, well, some people might be opposed to nuclear. I think we were concerned that there really aren't a lot of options, or there weren't at the time, and that this certainly was a viable option and a lower cost option at the time as well. So just wanted to reiterate that history. So it's just part of that.
Thank you. Pam, good thing we have some history on the board.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious, why does the solar tail off and get lower than it currently is? Not
You know, the
tail
contract.
off,
Yeah.
but
It's the contract commitment, right, Laura? Is that?
You talking about why is the yellow getting smaller after 2036?
yeah, why is the yellow getting smaller after 2026?
Because we've entered into typically 20-year solar contracts, and at the end of the 20 years, they drop off. So part of our job at the light plan is to always be, looking for opportunities and renewing them when they fall off. So for example, both Kearsarge 1 currently is slated to end in 2033. Kearsarge 2 ends in 2037. Select actually ends in 2026. It's not a very big one, but and yeah, so those are going to expire. I mean, the idea would be that those would be renewed. I assume, Dave, maybe you want to comment on that, on whether the infrastructure there would support, renewing at the existing capacities.
Yeah, I mean, in each of those contracts, all three of them, we have the opportunity to purchase the arrays if we would like at the market value, or we could renew the contracts. Those are some topics that we'll discuss as we get closer to it, but the options would be to purchase it outright, and own it, or to re-up the lease.
So I guess so you're factoring that into your calculation on the nuclear, I gather, because so is it possible to project out into the 2030s with a reasonable estimate of the solar capacity, or is that and every time I ask a question, everybody tell me this is a stupid question, you just
Nope.
need to wait and understand stuff. I mean, because I could be way.
Dave, can you speak to that,
So-
the
so the question is-
5-year review of the contracts? Your 20% every year, you're looking at the contracts. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we look at all our contracts, we monitor them, we do have gas contracts, as everyone knows, and usually those come back in a 3 to 5 year contract. And, we fill in as they expire. And doing that, if there's not a renewable source available, we would end up filling in for the next, 2 to 3 years with another gas contract in the interim. Obviously, we're trying to get away from that. That's the goal. But the reality is we only have so many options available. And, I will say Eni's been doing a really good job looking at new options, renewable sources, wind, hydro, solar, that sort of thing. So that's good. But, I think it's important to keep in mind that we will still have some gas contracts for a while.
How viable is a strategy for us to develop in-town solar as opposed to contracting from an outside source?
Well, we have the saturation issue that I mentioned earlier. We want to add more solar in town. I know the community wants that. For us to, continue to pursue that, we do need to do battery storage.
Is that what it boils down to, the saturation issue, battery storage? Or is it some sort of infrastructure that we yet to come to batteries with respect to our little problem with increasing solar? Is that the issue?
You cut out on some of that. Any chance you could repeat that?
Okay, so I'm just asking if the problem with increasing solar is boils down to battery storage only. Is that the problem? And if you solved that problem, would you then be able to swell your solar capacity within town?
Yes. So the problem is the solar output is pretty significant, and the load that we're seeing at the substation drops down to under 2 megawatts on one transformer and under 5 megawatts on the other. And if we had any one circuit or combined 2-circuit outage, we would have reverse power, which would shut off the power to the town. So by adding battery storage, we can shift that so that we're storing that solar and using it at the peak, but we're also taking care of a reliability issue.
So
So there's no other
I'm hearing-
technology. There are no other technology. Yeah.
There are other technologies, but utility battery storage is probably the right one at this point for us.
I mean, that's the strategy, right, Dave, that we took? Because, we've had discussions about, could we sell that to the grid? And we can't right now. We don't have the infrastructure. That's not our strategy. That's not our current strategy.
Correct.
Right. So that's worth history too.
And right sizing the transformers to be able to carry or handle the load is also not an option we should be considering.
The transformers are sized appropriately for system needs in future. We upgraded those a number of years ago. We can do a firm 70 megawatts through the transformers. Our contract with NSTAR is for 60 megawatts. Right now, our peak is less than 40 megawatts. The peak, our all-time peak was around 45 megawatts. So We're not hitting anywhere close to that. When it was up in the 45, 46 range, that's when we decided to upgrade the transformers because we were within 5% and it was good utility practice to do that. We had a solar explosion, which was great. So, had that happen a couple years before, we might have said, hey, let's hold off on this. But we are sized for the future. The substation has been upgraded. We're good to go, but we have a lot of capacity there left. But we are having a considerable amount of solar production, which is great. And we just need to factor in that we need to shift some of that solar load to the peak times, which are generally between 5 and 8 p.m. now. And, 15 years ago, the peaks were between 2 and 4 p.m. So, it's incredible what solar's done to that. But, and again, that's in all of the Commonwealth. It's not just Concord, right? The peak is for the whole area. So.
Yep. Thank you. Brian, you had a question, and then Gordon. You're on mute.
Sorry. So if you go to the last slide where you show the contracts over time, where the portfolio is becoming very heavy in hydro and nuclear, which are non-emitting options, but not renewable options. The hydro that we have is older than 97, and the nuclear is not a renewable source of energy. And, the desire of the town is to see the wind and solar contracts grow. And I know that there was in the past, I think it was a deep water offshore wind and solar offer from E&E. What's the status of that potential offer?
They are looking at multiple options for renewable contracts. And, I'm not going to get into the details of all of them right now because we don't have time, but, the offshore wind and stuff like that is at their forefront. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at solar, wind, bringing carbon-free options to MLPs that they provide service to. So you're going to be hearing more about stuff as it comes up, but there's, it's a little bit off of this topic at this point,
Well, my concern is that if we're adding more nuclear to the portfolio that's over duration into the 2030s, we're reducing our ability to capitalize on future wind and solar.
I don't think so. I don't agree with that, Brian. We have a lot of contracts that, are 15, 20-year contracts that are set to expire. We have gas contracts that are 3 to 5 years. There's room to add as we get out further. We have to be careful of what kind of power we get and when we get it so that we don't have too much during a given hour of one type and we have to sell it back. And that's the kind of stuff that E&E and Laura look at regularly to make sure we're not going long on contracts.
And I hope that the energy storage will help with that too.
Yeah, I think it will.
I had one more topic I wanted to bring up, which was
Is it on topic? Because we have other comments specifically.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about the certificates, the credits for nuclear, the EFECs. This is an industry credit. This is not something that is recognized by the New England pool or the RPS for the state. So this is something that I think if we have these contracts, that we should get them to match the contract we have, but they are not an offset to other emissions from other areas. So I just want to make that clear because this is wonky and so forth, but this is important because the reason that Article 41, the intent was for Concord to be additional to the state's efforts to adopt more renewables in the region. nuclear and hydro that's before 97 does not do that. New solar and wind contracts do that. So that's my big concern with this discussion about nuclear, is that it's good to support existing non-emitting resources, but I don't want to see them become our portfolio, because the town has the ambition of building new renewable assets on the grid.
I think we have to balance the short-term and long-term contracts that we have and the commitments that we have to provide enough energy in the town in the way that we want it. And so when we talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, the discussion around the nuclear power was to be the buffer between what we're producing during peak, during solar, and what we actually need. And short-term contracts allow us to continue to pursue renewable contracts as they come up, that there isn't just a plethora of renewable contracts available right now. Otherwise, I'm sure Laura would be looking at them and advising us to purchase more renewable contracts. So these are short-term strategies. And as you saw, the whole curve bends down as we go further out, because those contracts will be replaced. And hopefully, I'm hearing your interest is in replacing those with new renewable energy sources. And I'm hearing we need a mix to be able to meet our short-term and long-term goals on energy supply. Did I get that right?
Yes.
I think
Okay.
So in a nutshell, Alice, just at everyone, just so I get it, what we're saying is, and I appreciate Brian's comment, that there's a lot of give going forward to add in the most desirable renewables, and that nuclear doesn't put us on a path of showing a preference that will suffocate other options. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
That's it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of give. You haven't filled the portfolio anywhere near where you want to be with the most desirable renewables, and you need a short-term buffer with nuclear, which has some attractions and some disadvantages. That's it, right? Is that the kind of reduced?
So if you look at that
Brian,
chart,
I want to get that from Alice. I want to make sure I understand what you were. Is that right?
That is my understanding, yes. And so I think Brian's point was the EFTF in the report was looking at an additive benefit of the supply side. And nuclear, these are old plants. We're not adding new non-emitting sources. We're using existing non-emitting sources. And so although it helps green our own Concord supply so that we are and will have a 100% non-emitting fuel source, it doesn't move the needle on the state's greenhouse gas emission reductions.
what it does do is it is a cost savings. Nuclear and these existing plants offer power at a much lower price. And we need to have renewable power, but we also need to have affordable power. And what I'm hoping is that if we do the extension of this nuclear contract, you add that to the existing contract and the hydro, we're at 51% non-emitting. And so if we could get, a 50-50 mix of non-emitting and then renewable, that would be a good balance between our progressive desires to put new resources on the grid, as well as our ability to manage rates so that this becomes a cheaper source, the clean energy becomes a cheaper source than all the transportable fuels.
I think that this is Laura's full-time job, and that's what she is constantly looking for the best possible new contracts to meet our energy interests for renewable and non-emitting. Gordon's been waiting for a while.
Yeah, so that Seabrook recently had a license extension to, I think, 2050, which places its lifetime to just to the right of Laura's chart. And that was important because that ensured that it would continue to be a part of the regional portfolio. That could have not happened. They could have actually exited the market. So the idea that trading in nuclear is not additional, I think, is simplistic. The Millstone a plant in Connecticut, I think, shut down recently, like within the last 3 years or 4 years or something. That was, or the Yankee plant in Vermont. So these actually subtracted non-emitting power from the grid. And yet before that happened, people could have claimed that that wasn't additional. They were old plants. They weren't doing anything new for us, but their loss was a real loss. So I think that a strategy, supporting nuclear at least for an interim period, and even though it's 10 years seems like a long time, in the context of the time frame established by Article 41, we actually have time to take longer, contractual cycles and so forth. So the other thing I wanted to say is that the nuclear part of the portfolio that Laura shows in the slides do support solar, right? Because even we had options 1 and option 2, both of them had a solar component. Isn't that right? And let me just say something about that it's been a frustration for me, and I think the board, that Concord's significant efforts to deploy solar have not necessarily been recognized at 100% in the calculations that ISO New England makes about capacity. And they say, hey, look, peak time of the year, you had solar on your grid, that was reducing your demand by so many megawatts, but we're not going to count that because it's solar and it's inherently variable. This gets rid of that variability. So it actually is a way of getting full credit for the commitments that we have made to solar. So I know it's not perfect. I know that there's a lot of concern, and I share that concern about, after Fukushima and Chernobyl, for goodness sakes, that maybe nuclear isn't ideal, but it's actually does have a decent safety record. And I think that probably one of the negative things that I'd say about solar is just about nuclear as an industry is that their costs are very high. You see a really beneficial cost curve with solar it's just plummeted. And onshore wind is also plummeted, and hopefully we'll see something similar for offshore wind coming down. These are great curves, and I think that we'll see capacity come up, and those gray lines over on the left-hand side of Laura's curve will become not only available, but they'll be available in renewable format. I'm not seeing that happen with nuclear. So I'm not that optimistic that nuclear is going to be able to play this role that we see it right now into the future, as it just basically gets priced out. So what I'm trying to say is I see nuclear in our context as being an interim solution.
Thank you.
And I think
Stephen had a question. Oh, Stephen had a question. You already heard that?
Yeah, sorry. Good morning, everyone. So I guess my question is, is right now, and for the timing, is nuclear power seen as preferable to natural gas power in terms of our community's goals? So I guess when I saw Laura's chart, I looked at it as nuclear versus market or natural gas, not nuclear versus the renewables. I think that struck me as a bit of a false choice for where we're sitting here today. And so I think, and I don't know, I say all the time, I was a science major, but it was political science. So I don't really know. I can't really speak proficiently about a lot of this, but just on its face, that's the way it read to me, is that we're really trying to offset natural gas, which, as I just asked, seems less preferable than nuclear. So I don't know, it seemed pretty simple to me. Maybe I misread it.
Laura, do you want to respond to that? I have a lot of hands up, so and we allotted a half an hour for this conversation, and we're at a half an hour, and we haven't taken public comment yet. And I'm sure that there are people who would like to weigh in. So let's see if we can run through these the remaining questions from the board, and then we'll open it to public comment. And we'll try to close with a decision between option 1, option 2, or a combination of 1 and 2. And let's see if we can do that within 15 minutes. Okay, Pam had her hand up next.
I just want to make a very quick observation, which is everyone knows this, but in the nuclear often comes up as dangerous, and mortality rates and extravagant, very, very frightening things happen occasionally. But the bottom line is that the mortality rates from nuclear are far less than from fossil fuels when you just look at the big picture. So I think it's really important to remind the public that the thing that often catches us is this sense that we're doomed because of an accident. Even in the major accidents, the deaths were very limited. So it's just something to keep in mind when we talk about this stuff.
Thank you. Who else? I think so. Gordon, then Brian, and then we'll move to public comment.
Pivoting off of your comment, Steve, then looking again at Laura's chart, then the pink lines, the nuclear lines, you might really want to compare to the gray bars representing the gas. And an important distinction between those are, from an economic point of view, the nuclear bars are part of a long-term contract, whereas the gray bars are short-term or even at market, like day ahead. And one of the concerns that I've heard expressed about our portfolio is that in our pursuit of renewable energy or non-emitting energy, that we've started writing a lot of long contracts, which locks in the current price and will prevent us from benefiting from cost decreases going into the future. We'd also benefit if costs go up, but it's a kind of risk in its own going long.
Well, it also precludes the option of us buying into a renewable power supply should one come up if we're locked into long-term contracts. Brian, one more comment.
So I just want to remind us of Article 51, or the Concord Energy Goals, and what it says. It says, urge CMLP to reduce carbon emissions of its power supply portfolio and to offset any residual greenhouse gas emissions of its power supply through the purchase of RECs. So the idea of gas versus nuclear, both are going to have no emissions associated with them under that plan, because we will buy a REC to offset any emissions from market purchased energy. Now, the difference is cost. So the nuclear gives us a way to really go below the average cost for what's in our portfolio, whereas the other option with the market rate power plus a REC probably will go at or above our average. So that's kind of what we're trying to balance. And I don't want to say that there's one solution. We need to find a good mix. And I think that we're having a good discussion about that.
Wendy.
This is just a question so we can get on to the options. So option 1, I heard that we're continuing the existing contract and the cost differential is 3% lower than the current contract. On option 2, can you just clarify, Laura, is there risk with this non-fixed price structure? I mean, is there a higher risk under that contract?
Oh, that's a great question, Wendy. The energy component of that second deal is a fixed dollar per kWh amount. The part that's the non-fixed price structure is for the capacity. And I promised I would explain how that works, and I didn't. So let me just take 30 seconds to do that.
Thank you.
So normally when you, like I said, when you buy capacity, you might buy capacity at say $4 a kW a month, $4 per kilowatt per month. That's how people typically refer to the price. In this particular deal, what the supplier is proposing is that you buy at $4, but then there's a cost and benefit sharing mechanism. So let's say that the market price of capacity when we get to the time period, because you forward buy this for a number of years, right? As you get to the time period, let's say instead of being $4, it's $8. So we bought it for, it's now worth $8. Instead of us reaping the full $4 benefit between our purchase price and the current
I think we lost
value
her.
of the market. We split
Can
it
you
with
say that again, Laura? You cut out for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
No.
So if we buy at $4 and the value ends up being $8,
Yep.
we actually pay $6 for the capacity. If
Okay.
the price goes down, let's say it's $2 now instead of $4, we would pay $3 because again, we would split
all right. Okay.
the difference on the downside with the supplier.
Okay.
I actually don't happen to like that structure. My feeling is that you don't do something halfway. You either want to cover your capacity, volatility risk, and so you enter into, you buy $4, or you want to float with the market. I mean, I don't really like this sharing mechanism. It may be possible for us to say we just don't want to do that part of the deal, but that's sort of secondary. Do we want to cover some capacity? We had more capacity contracts in the portfolio previously, and some of them have fallen off or will fall off. And so we don't have a lot of coverage for capacity right now. I don't know how familiar board members are with what's happened to the price of capacity over the years, but it was quite cheap for some time, like $2 to $3 per kilowatt month. And then we had this huge explosion in 2017, 2018. It went to $15 per kW month. And even though we had some hedges on, we didn't have 100% hedge. So this had a real impact on the light plant's costs. Our capacity costs went from like $3 million a year to $6 million a year. I mean, it's a big number if the price jumps that much. So, there is something to be said for having some hedge on that amount. I will say that the near-term impact would be if we enter into, say $4 and the current market is $2, we're paying $2 over market in the near term. That's a cash flow, bleed on the light plant. We did this before when we had a hedge. We overpaid for the first few years, but then when it got to $15, we had this huge benefit to the hedge. So, hedges are not perfect. They're not without their costs, but they do have a place. So that's the non-fixed price structure. Wendy, it refers only to the capacity, not to the energy.
So
can
there's
we
definitely risk.
I'm wondering whether we can go back to the supplier, Bellingham in this case, and offer a different deal. I know we've done that in another contract where the supplier agreed to Concord's terms. They were not the original terms that were offered. So, we should look at whether if we offer $5 per kilowatt is the right hedge, where we'll pay a little more to hedge against a huge increase that we might otherwise have faced, and see whether they would take a different deal.
So this isn't just a deal with Concord. There's a number of other MLPs that are included. They've already signed up for it. We probably don't have a good chance of getting the terms changed at this point.
That was the case of the last contract, if I recall, that Concord was the outlier on cutting a different deal than the other MLPs. And we were successful. We can't always be successful. I understand that.
So I'm wondering on that particular point, Dave, if I agree that it's very unlikely we could change, say, the price they have offered, per kilowatt hour for the energy. I agree that it's unlikely we would get that kind of change, but I'm wondering on the capacity in particular, if they might be willing to accept, a fixed price structure rather than the non-fixed price structure. A little different flavor. I don't know, but I'm wondering if that might be more possible than another.
We can always ask. Doesn't hurt. I don't have a huge issue with the way it's set up right now personally. I respect what Laura said. I mean, ideally, the number and it's the number. But overall, I'm supportive of this deal. So.
Okay. If there's no more board comment, I'd like to open it to public comment, because I said we would do that and then return to whether we can make a recommendation to Dave and Laura for the option 1, option 2, or both. So let's see, do we have any comments from attendees? Pamela Dritt has her hand up. You could unmute and feel free to turn on your camera.
Thank you. 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. I'm in favor. Good job. Thank you. I expect that overall, we will expect the cost of power to come down with the adoption of solar and wind more generally. So maybe having the hedge would benefit us.
Thank you. I do not see any other hands raised from our participants. So let's go back to the board. We're sitting with a decision, basically a recommendation for Laura of option 1, option 2, or a combination of them.
Can
Wendy?
you repeat the options?
Yeah.
They
Repeat,
are,
yeah. Are we, and these are, we're voting on only one for, I mean, how are you doing this? Just curious.
So I think you could, yeah, go back to that first slide. We could do them separately. The first decision point is whether or not we want to extend the existing power supply contract by 6 years. This is that deal where we bought 20 years worth of solar initially, the one in New Hampshire. And we purchased only 5 years of that shape to make the block because they wouldn't offer any longer term because they hadn't had their licensing. Now they've got their licensing. They're coming back offering us a 5-year extension. They weren't willing to go past 2035, even though their license goes to 2050 from their own corporate structure. They decided only to offer us this additional 6 years from 2030 to 2035. So we're talking about approximately, what did I say, 4 or 5% on our
3%.
3%. Okay, sorry. I'm looking at the,
Oh.
No, it's 5. It's 5.
Is it 5? Oh, good, even better.
It's an additional 5% that would go from
Oh,
2030 to 2035, and that's to fill in this solar. So that's the first decision point. And I think you would maybe, perhaps Alice, if I might suggest, considering them separately because we don't have to enter into these both. If we do enter into both of them, there's a slight price advantage that the supplier offered, maybe on the order of 50 cents a megawatt hour. So that's not very much. I was trying to put that in kilowatt hours, but it's too small.
okay. So Pam, do you understand what the vote is? Well, does the whole board understand? So the existing, the option 1 is to extend the current power supply contract that rounds out our curve on the peak hours so that we have adequate capacity. And that's a 6-year extension of the current contract. Is there a sentiment of the board around this?
So Pam, I'd like to make a motion that we support this option 1, and we can talk about option 2 separately, that it's consistent with our strategy and it's a lower cost option, and just leave it at that.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Gordon, I think has a question.
Could I ask Dave or Laura, just to confirm that it is a lower cost option?
That was my 3% Laura reference earlier, because that's what you quoted.
It's so it's lower price than the existing contract. It is about the same price as conventional energy. So I can't tell you exactly the price because that would be inappropriate. But it certainly compared to buying solar or wind, it is definitely a lower cost option.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
it's lower than what we're currently paying under contract.
And it's lower than what we're currently paying under the contract.
Okay. So do I have a second on Wendy's motion?
A second.
Brian. Okay, let's have a vote of the board. It's a roll call vote. I'll start according to what I see on my screen. Gordon.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Wendy.
In favor?
Brian.
In favor of option 1.
Pam.
Favor.
And Alice in favor. Unanimous vote of the board for option 1, extension for 6 years of the current contract for nuclear. All right. Option 2 discussion.
Option 2 is to enter into a new nuclear-based, non-emitting power supply contract. We don't have to buy the capacity. That can be considered separately. So just let's think about the energy piece. It's about 9% of the portfolio that we would be adding on top of the about 26% we have today of nuclear. So you're going from 26% to 35% for the period 2025 to, well, let me back up a sec. So it's adding 9% to the portfolio for 2025 to 2034. That's on top of an additional 26% we have of nuclear, but that nuclear deal only goes to 2029. So we'd be looking at 35% nuclear portfolio, but only till 2029, and then it would drop to 14% till 2034, and then the 5% in 2035.
So that would be,
Drops what? I'm sorry. At 2034, it drops what to what?
In 2035, it drops to 5%.
I'm sorry.
That's because the 9% we're talking about right now, Pam, goes from 2025 to 2034, just a 10-year deal.
and that's with the assumption that during that period, when we require an increase in energy supply, we'll be able to purchase hopefully more renewable sources and put in contract from 2030 beyond.
Yeah, I will point out that and I feel obligated to point this out, that purchasing the additional 9% from 2025 to 2034 does bring us up to about 70% hedged for 2025 to 2029, 65 to 70%. So that leaves 30% in the portfolio to fit in other resources. And bear in mind that we typically keep 20% open to the spot market. That has been our policy in the past.
So that remains with just 10%.
Right.
That's my concern.
So how do you resolve that concern?
Well, I think for me, I understand Brian's concern there. If you look at our renewable contracts that we have, they typically come in at around 3% is about what we get out of a renewable deal. So that 10% remaining, we would either say we get 3 more renewable deals, or, then the board would have to talk about, do we want to cut into the market piece at all? And we've done that before. We've around 15 to 18% in the market opposed to 20. So there's strategies that you can look at it. It's not perfect by any means, but if we had 3 new renewable deals, they'd probably be around 3, maybe 4% each. That's what you'd be talking about.
So are you comfortable with retaining only around 10% flexibility? I'm calling it flexibility for potential new renewable power.
I am, because we're really talking about 30%, not 10%.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I wouldn't not do that because of this.
Okay.
It's a non-emitting resource, and I think it's something we need to strongly consider.
Mm-hmm. Gordon?
I understand that in spite of the Trump administration's opposition to offshore wind, that there's actually a substantial number of offshore wind projects that are really on the verge of being approved. So the beginning of this contract is 2025. That would potentially be enough time for that whole industry to kind of get itself sorted out, and our visibility into availability of offshore resources or perhaps other renewable sources could really be different for us even in a year. So I don't know.
So what I'm hearing from you, Gordon, is a concern about the length of this contract being a 10-year contract as opposed to a 5-year. I mean, it's difficult to know whether the change will be quick enough for us to have contracts available in the way that you're talking about for offshore. Right. So it's all about hedging our opportunities and our future design.
And when I earlier described nuclear as fitting into a short term, this is an interim towards a future where more renewable is available. The fact that this kicks in 2025 is interesting. It makes it a little bit. Anyway, it's not quite as good an immediate stepping stone.
Laura?
I just wanted to mention, Gordon, I agree with you, but keep in mind that offshore wind will be at least twice as expensive as
Yeah.
this nuclear. So it's, you got to keep remembering the cost. You know, we want to do a perfect hedge and get all new additive stuff, but it, you know, that would be very pricey to fill all this in with offshore wind. That's the only comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
So you're feeling the
I'm
10% is sufficient to be able to fill in if a good offshore wind deal came about, because we still have 10% capacity for contract.
You know, I think this is a difficult decision. I think you guys have hit on all the correct points. To the benefit, it's cost effective. It is nuclear. We're supporting the, you know, maintenance of this facility on the grid. The downside, as Gordon's pointed out, it doesn't start till 2025. And so the 10 years is going into a period where we're hopefully anticipating incremental renewable. You know, normally I think we would not be 70% hedged 8 years out. You know, you typically see like a line, you know, that goes like this, but you can't always follow that perfectly, especially when we're talking about entering into these resource-based deals. It's much easier to go out and buy on the market, you know, exactly what you need, 18 months, 24 months, you know, 2 megawatts here, 5 megawatts there. It's easy to fill stuff in. But when you're talking about a real live resource, it comes in these chunks of, you know, 5 or 10 years. And so it's not that easy to do that perfect, you know, line that we've historically been able to accomplish.
Well, as you've shown in your slide, by 2030, that we lost the first contract. And so this is a sharp decline between 29 and 30 when the contract ends. So it's a 4-year overweighting perhaps of our need.
But if option 1 and 2 both pass, then we'll actually push out that fall to 2034, and it'll be more severe. It'll be 35%. Is that correct?
Not in 34,
When does option 1 end?
Can you bring
The
up
extension?
the graph again? I'm sorry, I can't drive.
it drops in 2030. No, I'm sorry.
No, no,
just
2029.
29.
There,
So
that
in
one.
2030, our percentage would be 14.
Yeah, the existing deal ends in 2029, the big one, that's 26%.
Right.
Okay, that 9% is the potential incremental deal we're talking about today.
Right.
The reason that becomes 14% in 2030 is because we're talking about that 5% extension for the shaped solar. That
Right.
makes it, you know, 9 plus 5. And when that
Oh,
shaped solar falls off in 2034, you get just the tail end of that shaped solar bill, which is only 5%.
thank you. I didn't understand that. It clarifies.
Thank you. All right, how does the board, all right, let's get a sense of the board.
Can I just ask one more
Yep.
question, Laura? If we were to have other deals come up, and you know, I think Dave, you said it would be typically 3 to 4% of the portfolio. What is the contract? Would it be like a 2023 contract at the earliest, or 2024? I mean, how do you predict how soon those things could come on?
So, you know, a lot of the deals that he's looking at with other vendors, they still have to be built. And that
Yeah.
takes,
Okay.
you're talking a couple of years out.
Okay.
And one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is all of our renewable contracts are long-term contracts.
Yeah.
You know, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why, you know, some of the portfolio was filled up for a while, where years ago we would only do, you know, smaller contracts for 3 years, maybe 4 at most.
Okay.
And we just keep rolling them. You know, trying to get more non-emitting sources on there, it giving us longer term contracts.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have a motion on option 2? Anybody willing?
So I move that the board, well, Wendy had very nice wording, but it was the board moves to recommend that we endorse option 2 to enter into a 10-year contract between 2025 and 2034 for carbon-free energy and capacity.
Should we break, my question to the board is, should we break energy from capacity to see if we can negotiate capacity that is less volatile than the current option, which has escalating costs potentially?
So Alice, I was going to say, I would vote in support of this with the consideration that we try that with
Okay.
capacity. That would be my recommendation.
So
Yeah,
that
I
would allow
also-
one vote on it.
I also, I think that the motion could allow for that flexibility, but I think it could also say that we can go with it either way, but we're asking the staff to negotiate on our behalf to improve the deal in the way that we discussed.
So the motion on the table is to move forward with option 2, to approve option 2 with energy and capacity, but with the caveat that we will approach E&E to represent Concord's interests on a slightly different version of the capacity contract than what's currently being offered, and see if that has, if we can possibly do that to our advantage. And if not, the sense of the board is that this will accept the terms of the current offering.
Yep.
Okay, do I have a second on that? Okay, roll call vote. I'll start around my screen. Gordon,
I approve.
Brian,
Decline.
okay, Wendy,
Approve.
Pam,
I feel like I really don't know enough. I mean, I think I get it. I think I may abstain still on this. Although I will say that I'm inclined to favor it. I just I'm sorry to hedge like this, but I think I probably should abstain because I don't know enough about this.
okay, and I support this option 2 as stated. So the vote is 3. Yes, Gordon.
I'm sorry, it's out of order, but should we have asked for a public comment?
We asked for public
We
comment
did.
before we
We
went
did,
into
okay,
deliberation
all right.
on the options.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the current vote of the board are 3 in support of option 2, 1 abstention, and 1 no vote. Got that, Wendy?
Yep.
Great,
Got it.
thank you. All right, so that discussion went on longer than we had anticipated. I will get better at planning these meetings. Let's take a look at where we are on our agenda, make some changes to the agenda as we need to. I think that the next discussion we need to work on is the AMI. And this will be a brief update on where we are with the AMI contract, and then a discussion of the policies that are required for CMLP to move forward with an opt-out strategy. And there's a wide range. I think you may have seen the materials in your packet and in my note to you about the state of opt-out strategies across the country. So Dave, you want to start us off on AMI contract?
Sure. So as I mentioned in the last meeting, the RFP for a consultant was released in November. Currently, the RFP was requested by 20 different consultants, which we're pleased with the interest.
Good.
We did conduct a pre-proposal meeting on December 1st last week via Zoom webinar. That was well attended. Questions from the consultants on the RFP are due this Friday, the 10th. And staff will issue an official response by the 17th, which is next Friday. And then the proposals are due on the 7th of January. So we have some good interest, which is great. I'm hoping we don't get 20 proposals that we have to,
Nice.
but 8 to 10 would be plenty, but possibly could get 20, who knows? So that's kind of where we are in the AMI RFP process. It's moving along, and we haven't had to adjust the dates. So that's favorable.
That's great.
Great.
And I know we were concerned early on about whether we'd have sufficient competition in that bid, and it looks like we do. All right, so the conversation we're having will move towards now is, what is an opt-out strategy that those boards should advise CMLP to implement? The materials that we had in our packet offered a wide variety of options. And I should mention that there are several pieces of legislation currently working their way through, may not make it through this session, but there's a DPU study about grid optimization and the role that AMI plays in grid optimization, and that being a priority for the DPU, and a bill that is currently in Ways and Means that that would require a no-cost option to opt out for consumers. So there's a wide range of opt-out strategies that even this legislature is considering. I don't know if any of it's going to move forward anytime in the near future, but we do know that we have a number of people who have asked to opt out already. And I think the policy, we need to come up with a strategy to advise CMLP on whether we think that there should be a cost associated with it for the purchase and installation of a non-AMI meter, and what that cost should be, as well as any maintenance costs that might be required. So how do we want to proceed? Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I think, for us to put a policy together, we just need, a sense of the board on what the board's looking at. We have people that have requested analog meters, which I've shared with you guys, and we don't have a policy on that right now. We don't have analog meters. For us to move forward, we kind of need to get a sense of where you guys are on this. There's going to be additional expenses on the light plant to physically have a truck roll to go read the meters. Do we have additional costs that we put in for that? Some other MLPs have this opt out of a smart meter, and they do have different meter charges. And that's really for us to put a policy together. Kind of got to get a feel for where you guys are on that.
Okay. Discussion of the board. Does anybody have a strong opinion or somewhere they want to start?
Alice,
Wendy, start with Wendy.
I do, and I did read the material. So I think the board has discussed all along that we would likely need some kind of opt-out. So I'm certainly in support of it, but I also think that when we make that type of decision, there should be a cost, and the consumer should pay some portion of that cost. In the information that you shared, Alice, there were some costs where towns charged a one-time setup fee, and others, they also coupled that with a monthly fee. I could go either way on a setup fee. But I do think there should be a fee associated with it. And in line with our cost of service study, I think the cost has to align to what the cost is for serving those customers.
Thank you.
So it's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Except for low income, that's the other thing. That we do need to be considerate of the low income consumers. But
so let me ask a question about a strategy. Is an opt-out strategy specific to an individual in a specific location that expires if a person were to leave that location? So somebody lives in a house, they move, what happens to the meter? Does it automatically revert to an installation of an AMI meter in the house because there are now new residents there? And then what is the added cost to do that? And is that something we should even consider in this policy?
So that would be an operating procedure that we have to work out the details on with Carol's team. My initial reaction is if someone were to move out that currently had an analog meter, when the new account was set up, we have to explain to the customer that, we have a smart meter policy with the option to opt out. And before we would go out and remove that meter, we would, communicate with the customer so that they would have the option of getting a smart meter or keeping the analog meter. I don't think it would be just change it out and see what happens. I think, we'd have to have communication with the customer.
That makes sense.
And that approach would avoid hitting them with any kind of one-time charge for that new resident.
Correct.
That makes sense. Gordon.
I agree with Wendy. I think really on every point that she made, and I'd add to it, well, so that that we've always expressed a commitment to opt out. That seems reasonable. I think also the fact that this minority in the population with a set of views that are not shared by the community, that there's an obligation for them to carry the incremental cost of that opt out. And I just ask Dave or Laura if they are actually, there's an additional cost above the ones that we've just talked about, the sending a person out to read the meter every month, setup costs and so forth, but also the fact that they're opting out of AMI, they're not able to contribute to peak shaving in the same way that everybody else, that there might actually be an incremental increase to capacity charges associated with peak usage that that the rest of us are avoiding by participating in time of use rates.
The only thing I would say, Gordon, to that is, you know, if someone gets an analog meter, that doesn't mean they're not going to help, you know, shave the peak. They can do their part. We just wouldn't be able to see the data. So,
Okay.
you know, a customer can still go about, you know, we send out peak alerts or whatnot. I think the part that we're going to be missing is the, you know, the distribution analysis that we would get from a smart meter. We'll be missing a customer or two here and there. So it does have an operational impact, but I don't think we should say that a customer is not going to conserve energy, because
I think that's probably true. And I think you were talking about real-time data versus forensic data, where we could go back and see whether, if we wanted to do that research, whether there was a shaving of the peak by will, but we just don't have the immediacy of the AMIs. Yep, Brian.
So I like the concept of a setup fee that would cover, with the analog meters, you have to do some work to prepare those meters to verify they're operating correctly. And you need the equipment and so forth to tool up to do that. That a setup fee would handle most of those costs very well. The additional fee for the fixed charges, the distribution for that meter reader to go out each month could easily be collected there. And to Gordon's point on the, you know, if we look at our time of use when we develop it and look what the average cost per kilowatt hour is over the year, if the opt-out rate is that price or a little higher, I think that's a fair way to assign the variable per kilowatt hour cost. So those are my thoughts. And I think we do have to offer this option.
Okay, Pam, thank you, Brian.
I support what Wendy said. I just wonder, is there a lifespan of this policy? I mean, I'm thinking, are things dynamic enough that we may conclude at some point that the policy should be revisited? And I don't know if you have standard language in your policies, or whether, and I hesitate to use the word pilot or things like that, but is this policy intended to be bounded in a way that would allow revisitation of the issue?
Yep. You know, all the policies can be revisited at any time. I kind of equate it to rate setting. In the rate tariffs, you know, they're all subject to change. So we do have the ability to go back in and revise a policy like this if need be. So we're not bound to it for 30 years, I guess, is where I am. But
I imagine the answer is no, but is there any value in adding any language whatsoever that suggests, you know,
Periodic review?
Yeah, just because it is, you know, it's a direction we're heading in, and this is for the exceptional, you know, client or whatever. So I just wondered if anybody thinks it might be useful just to add a little, you know, season it with a statement that, you know, this is subject to review or whatever.
We can
I personally see no harm in having a statement at the end of the policy that says this is subject to review periodically.
I think that's in all of them right now.
Oh, is it?
Right?
Okay. again, sorry for my wasting your time.
You're not
Yeah.
wasting time.
No, it's a good question.
Yep.
No, and Pam, one way to implement that is we could keep it, but keep the opt-out, but change the opt-out price and kind of nudge people off of the plan that way. Just going into the future.
Well,
Let's work on a plan for now. I think that's an idea that we can consider as we go forward. Setting an optimal price for setup is difficult at this time because we've never done it. And we know that there's some amount of setup cost. When we looked at that article, it ranged from $0 to, I think, $171 for setup cost. I'm not in a position, I don't know that anybody else on the board is in a position to determine what the right setup cost is today. But somewhere between, it seems like reasonable, somewhere between 0 and 171. Wendy. You're on mute, please?
Sorry, it just is
Thank you.
in the context of smart meters. So we're not charging clients for the smart meter installation. So I guess it's just in that context. So we're going to spend money for all the smart meter installations, but you know, why would we charge the analog meter?
That's in the
Or is this-
fixed cost.
I guess my point is that you're installing new meters across the town, right? But you're going to cull out this one type of meter because it's just different. I'm just a comment. It's an observation. I'm not too
Right.
strong on it.
On that, could you just charge the increment, what they would have charged for the
Oh, there you go.
smart meter, and then just the incremental charge is what
Right.
they would suffer? Is that right?
I think
It's a good point. Yeah.
I think what you're looking at in terms of expenses is essentially we're going to purchase analog meters for a percentage of the customers, and we're going to purchase smart meters for the rest.
Right.
You're really talking about an additional expense to go. That's the different cost. That's it. Because the smart meters, you're not going to have a truck roll and an employee going house to house. So that's the only difference.
Okay.
Okay, though we should note that the reason that we're moving towards smart meters is for grid optimization, to be able to have this two-way communication. So there's a loss to the total grid capacity understanding by an opt-out of that whole discussion, because we can't manage the grid as well.
That was essentially my point.
Yeah. But we don't want to penalize anyone for choosing to opt out, whether it's for health reasons or any other reason. They should not be penalized, but there is a cost to that business that can be realized. And when we looked at the articles that we reviewed before this meeting, none of the monthly costs ever come close, I think, to meeting the light plan's cost of going out and reading a meter, coming back with the data, inputting it into the system, and then looking at the data afterwards. There is no, I mean, at $9 a month, that we couldn't do that for $9 a month, or $15 a month, which is around the range that the other states
32.
have implemented. So we're never going to recoup the total costs. So I'm thinking that the initial cost is where we want to set a figure for what we would expect a person who opts out to pay for the installation of a new meter. Gordon?
There may be software costs too associated with the billing system.
Yeah, that's an operational cost, is I think what you're saying?
Yeah, it's probably not set up to handle, it is not set up to handle analog costs, so it would have to be retooled in order to have this new input.
Okay. Dave is pondering. All right, Pam.
Just very briefly, I mean, I would imagine we want to introduce disincentives to continuing to use analog. And could that be done through language in the policy that explains the value? I don't know, I have no idea, but I mean, there are a couple of ways. One is by education and the other is by making it pricey. And I just throw out the idea that the notion of disincentive, I imagine, must be in there somewhere, right?
So the article that was sent out was very interesting in that they mentioned that some states require a physician's note or some kind of, some kind of proof that there is a concern here, that is not just someone, because I could easily see this opt-out being abused by someone who doesn't like the time of use. I could see someone who, consumes a lot of on-peak electricity and doesn't want to care about time of use, just saying, oh, I'm going to do the opt-out so that I can pay like I used to pay, 10 years ago. So I want to make sure that that's not a viable option for them. There's ways of financially making it punitive, or to do something like a verify.
So
method.
I just want to make sure we're clear. We're talking about an opt-out for analog meters right now. We will be talking about an opt-out for time of use rate. at a later
Separately.
time. There's two different pieces there. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Right.
That wasn't clear.
Yeah. Laura.
Yeah, just to talk to that point a bit. So time of use is not the same thing as the AMI meter, because it is true that if you want to be on time of use, you have to have an AMI meter, right? Because it has to be able to tell what time of day you're using energy. But Brian, there will be those who are willing to have a smart meter, but don't want to be on the time of use. And they'll have that option to opt out of the RTOU rate and be on the R1 rate, but there'll be a premium associated with that.
But there will be an option for a meter that does not use wireless communication, but does collect data for time of use billing.
No, I mean,
Okay.
So-
I didn't think that existed, but I thought that was what was being implied.
no.
Right now we're talking about, we have, a percentage of our customers that don't want, an AMI type of meter on their house. They want an analog meter. And so we're looking at getting direction from the board on creating that policy and what it might look like, so that we can actually put a policy together. And, it could be, we're not going to allow that. We're going to allow it. If we allow someone to opt out of a smart meter or a radio read meter and go to analog, is there additional charges because there's additional expenses or not? And those are that's what this discussion is. The opt out of time of use is going to be another discussion in the future.
Thank you. Pam, and then Gordon.
Quickly, I'm very much in favor of making sure the costs are borne by the opting out person. And this is strictly on the analog. The idea, I was thinking about the idea of asking for some minimal verification, so people at least have to think. I mean, I was concerned when I was thinking about it myself that it added a burden of decision-making onto the light board, but I would be interested to know if there's a very quick, check a box thing that provide and attest to the fact that you have a reason why you're doing this, which I would imagine normally would have to do with health and concerns about the electromagnetic field issues, et cetera. But I'm in favor of just making people think so that they're not, and if we could construct a quick check, three reasons, the reasons why that Dave and his people would not find burdensome, I think that's a good way of starting the educational process.
I think, Pam, unfortunately you weren't on the board. It was, I think, 2 years ago, where we held a public meeting, maybe for a good 2 hours, and heard a lot about the reasons that people want to opt out. So I'm not just, I would caution us against requiring an individual to justify their reasons to opt out based on health, which may be proprietary or not shareable, or whatever the reasons, because we heard quite a lot, and there are a number of people who are sitting in today's audience who I think that may want to speak to this and talk about why they have an interest in opting out. So I would not want to put a burden either on the light plan to determine whether that's a reasonable request to opt out, and just assume that people have personal reasons to opt out. That's my take on it. I understand where you're coming from. I just also want to say that the Senate bill that is in Ways and Means probably won't make it out this session, just because we're getting to the end of the session, would disallow any punitive action against somebody, or a policy that sets an adverse financial burden on those who want to opt out. So it's currently in Ways and Means, it's passed the House and Senate, both with that language in it, that you cannot penalize in any way financially or place an unfair burden on those who choose to opt out.
Just to wrap up on my point, I absolutely agree with the sensitivities, the difficulties, the legal barriers, all of that. I'm just suggesting maybe for the future that there are ways to draft things that at least encourage people to think, and maybe more importantly, to give us data that we might be able to use. And I think that it's all about the drafting and the sensitivity to legal constraints and people's privacy, et cetera. But I would just at least hold that out there for the future, because I think that the barriers that you just articulated are not insurmountable. And I don't think people should be penalized. Absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you. Gordon.
I think that it would be helpful if we try to use the word analog meter instead of opt out, because up till now, the term opt out has been in the context of a opt out time of use rate. And so I'd rather keep the opt out associated with whether or not you're in the time of use to the tour. So I was going to say something else, but I forgot.
So quick question. So that, to Gordon's point, I'm still a little foggy on the analog meter. So Dave, do you mind taking a second to describe the functional capability of an analog meter? Is it what I'm thinking, which is the old spinning disc? And okay, so at the old spinning disc, there's no data collection. It's just once a month, a guy walks up, tells us what it says, and that's the only data point.
Yeah, once a month, a meter reader, which we don't have any meter readers right now, would go up to a home, read the meter left to right. There's dials that spin, and you would put it into a handheld device that is then connected to the billing system, and it's downloaded. It's just what's the kilowatt hours read, and then the billing system does the math from the previous read, and that calculates your usage.
So if someone was to get an analog meter, there is no possible way to apply time of use billing.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Wendy.
I'm just going to tell you, my computer's about to shut down, so I'm going to have to restart, and I'll be back.
Okay. It is 9:12. I'm doing a time check. We're going to stop this meeting at 9:30. We have a number of citizens that are here that I assume want to speak to this issue, and I'd like to give them an opportunity. Gordon, do you have something pressing that you want to add at this point, or should we allow?
I just wanted to clarify or confirm that a person on the analog meter would be able to participate in the residential R1 rate that everybody currently is on. So, and that as we move into tour, that rate will have a 3% or so additional fee associated with it. Is that right?
Yeah, if someone had an analog meter, they could participate in the existing R1 rate.
So the point is that that would not be discriminatory. So Alice, you said that there would be some rules or legislation that might prevent us from penalizing analog users. It wouldn't have, that 3% would, anyway, that would be, I think that would be allowable under that law because it's not discriminatory.
I think that would be allowable. I think this was a direct cost that the bill addresses a direct cost to opt out. So
Okay.
Purchase of a meter monthly, some of the states that you saw had a monthly fee ranging from $9 to $30 a month extra.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for the conversation. I'd like to see whether we have citizens interested in commenting on the analog meter question, and then we'll come back to the board. I would really like to finish at 9:30. So I'm not, even if it means cutting the issues or cutting part of the agenda at the end of this meeting. So let's start with David Allen. David, if you're speaking, you're on mute. There you go.
Getting the bloody thing off mute. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think this point is probably now traversed the discussion on the board, but I think it's also worth underlining on this question of, one way to put it is financial incentive not to use analog, or to be blunt about it, penalizing. Well known that I do not agree with the point of view of those who see a health concern here. In fact, there's a document before the board right now that underlines that profoundly. At the same time, when I look at it through their eyes, I think the only upstanding policy position here, the only way forward with integrity is for folks who want to opt out to cover the additional cost, but for there to be no penalty. They should not, there be no incentive for them to do so. I think it would be profoundly unacceptable to do something like that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Next comment from Sheldon Hines, and then Courtney Whalen. So Sheldon first.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Sheldon Hines, 74 The Valley Road. I think the board has some misunderstandings about analog meters. Several of us are requesting analog meters now. The meters that are in place now are transmitting data every 7 seconds. The FCC already recognizes that there's danger, health danger in those transmissions. The FCC requires that nobody be located within 8 inches of the existing meters that we have. I have requested over the last year several times for the light plant to start to comply with the FCC regulations relating to this. I've sent the regulation, I've sent information about the particular meters that are on people's houses, and there's been no communication to the public that the existing meters are regulated by the FCC and are required not to be located to the public within 8 inches of them right now. So I want an analog meter now to replace what I have. In the future, we don't know what kind of meters we'll have. The digital meters that will be available when the time comes are programmable. And if they were to be programmed such that they only broadcast up 2 to 6 times a day, I would be happy to have a meter like that. But I believe that the meter we have right now could be programmed to do that. But the trouble is that there is actually a truck that goes by to read what we have now, and they don't know when they're coming by. The ideal situation would be to allow people to have their meters programmed to be only generate electrical radiation, EMR, at the minimum level required to meet all of the objectives of the town, including, and it could transmit voltage as well as the usage at that moment. And there's nothing technically to prevent doing that. And if there were cables, if it was connected to our cabling system in town, then there would be no need for any wireless transmissions. It could be done through the wires. So I want an analog meter now. I'm prepared to give the town the information from the meter at whatever frequency you want, weekly or monthly. I've done this in the past for water charges in a previous house. When I had an analog meter and they wanted to install a digital meter, I said, no, you can't come in and do that. And they said, okay, well, we'll accept your manual readings. My meter is located about 80 feet or 100 feet up a hill. When there's a 3-foot snowstorm, it's not going to be very possible for somebody to come up and read my meter. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't have an analog meter and be allowed to provide the readings to the town. So I want an analog meter now. The town should consider through its consultant options for the future that will allow even digital meters to be used that are minimally providing, sending out data. constant readings, transmissions from AMI or AMR meters are just simply not necessary for any purpose that the town has in mind. We don't have any electrical. Anyway, that's the gist of my story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Courtney?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. Courtney Whalen, 65 Dover Street. First, I just want to thank the board for taking up this discussion today regarding the analog meter policy and working with the public and talking about this. I just want to say, this is not kind of just a Concord issue. And again, this is going on all over the country and different countries around the world that people are discussing opt-out policies and not wanting the AMI on every single house. So I just want to reiterate that this is not just a small little Concord group of individuals who don't want these smart meters on their homes and want to go back to analog. And some people, I think some people it is health concerns, and other people, they just don't want this excessive amount of data collected on them. There's been security, people have cited security reasons, so there's a kind of a plethora of reasons why people are not wanting, this type of information collected on them by these meters. And I do think people who do want an analog meter back on their house, that we absolutely are committed to climate change and climate change causes and doing our part to really, follow these guidelines on, if there's a surge and we, need to shut off our devices or kind of conserve that, absolutely. I know I'm committed to these causes, even though I do want an analog meter on my home. And again, I know there was a couple of comments about people being in favor of having a checkbox as to why they should or should not. And I appreciate some people kind of backing that up. I think that, we should not have to be disclosing why we do or do not want to participate, either why we do or do not want to participate in having an analog or an AMI meter. And, there's going to be people who do have the AMIs and are going to opt out in that time of use anyways, because they want to use energy how they want to use energy. And then finally, I did see on the RFP that, you guys do have an option for hardwired options. And I think that's wonderful. And I think if things could be transmitted via a hardwired option versus the wireless, I really would explore that option and utilize the fiber optic system that we've implemented in a lot of the town. And that's a great way to go for people who maybe have more security reasons or health concerns. And then I just want to say I've been asking for this analog meter for a really long time. And I would kind of like a kind of an idea of how long it might take to have this AMR that I currently have on my house taken off. And when, you might think that I could actually get this particular meter placed on my house. So again, thank you guys. And that's it.
Thank you, Courtney. I see no further hands raised from participants. Let's go back to the board. I think we are now looking at a recommendation for a policy for CMLP going forward on an opt-out strategy. And do I have a motion for this board, from this board? Wendy?
So I make a motion that we adopt a policy to support a consumer's request to opt out and to have an analog meter placed on their house, and that the light plant consider a fee associated with that would cover the cost of that particular service.
An installation fee is what?
No, maintenance fee,
Maintenance fee.
maintenance cost.
To Gordon's point, could I have that motion changed just a little bit to a non-radio read meter instead of an opt-out meter, just an analog meter. That way it's just about the wireless communication, not about the data collection and some of the other discussion points.
So I can revise my motion to recommend that the light board support the installation of analog meters for consumers upon request, and that there be a maintenance fee associated with that that would be recurring to cover the cost of the light plant for maintaining that analog meter.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Are we ready for a vote? I'll go around the screen from the way that I see it. Gordon, I'll start with you.
I'm in favor.
Brian,
In favor.
Pam,
Favor?
Wendy, oh,
In favor?
and Alice in favor. It's a unanimous vote that we will, we advise the light plan to develop a policy that allows for analog meters upon request with a reasonable fee and expectation for the operational costs. Wendy and Pam.
I wanted to just support Pam's earlier comment that the light plant try to collect some reason for the request for the analog meter, because I think that information is valuable. I'm not saying it's a requirement, but I do think it's important that we collect the reasons for it.
Thank you. And Pam.
I just, I'm new to the board and and I've been on other boards, so I welcome and have appreciated all public comments we've ever gotten. I just wanted to say, with respect to this particular issue, that as is often the case, the comments were really helpful to me. I really appreciated the comments, and I just wanted to thank the public for them, as I think is the case most often with public comments. But it was very helpful for me.
Right. All right, it is. Thank you for all the comments, and thank you for everyone who's been sitting through this for 2 hours. It is 9:26. We are over the time allotted for today's meeting. And I want to acknowledge that there are a couple of items that we didn't talk about, which was one is a goal setting process, and to hear any other public comments. So I think we've heard public comments. I don't see hands raised. And at this, we can take up goal setting at our next meeting. And I'm ready for a motion to adjourn, unless you have further comments. When?
I have one question. So when we have the discussion on goal setting, it might be helpful for the board members to review our strategy.
Yes, I was
long-term
going to
strategy
suggest
for
that.
that context, and then tie that also to the climate action goals that have been set for the town, so that we're keeping that in mind.
I will send out a link out to the strategic plan for the light plant is in lieu of today's conversation, so that we're prepared to talk next week. Great thought. Thank you, Wendy.
I'll offer a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I have a second.
Okay.
Pam seconds it.
Thanks.
Okay, roll call vote. Gordon,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
Pam,
Yes.
Wendy, yes.
Yes.
Alice, yes. It's unanimous. Thank you all.
All
We
right.
did it. Well, not quite timely enough. I'm getting better.
But hey, the chair did very well today. We had a great discussion.
It was a very good discussion today, and I thank all the attendees who listened in and offered their thoughts on AMI particularly. Thank you
Okay.
all.
All right.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.